We can do our alien thing by disappearing.
Right?
Oh, alien.
It's sucking me up into the ship. Ah! Hi, and welcome to the Jonny Random Show. Today is going to be the conspiracy slash everything theory of everything episode, where I'm going to lay out a lot of different things that I have thought about and how I think a lot of conspiracies fit into the broader schemes of history. So it's going to be a more fun episode. I hope you enjoy it. We are on Patreon. Well, we'll be on Patreon soon. So if you want any of us to upgrade our cameras, get better equipment, do stuff like that, please consider supporting the show. That would be greatly appreciated. And then we can do more things and be a little bit more tech, because right now we're running pretty low tech, but that's okay. Also, we're still doing the reaction videos on this channel on YouTube only, but this part of the show is on Apple Podcast. We're on Google Podcast, and we're on Spotify and all the major platforms right now. So that's kind of a new thing that's happened this week, but I've uploaded some of the old ones, except for the education episode. You can only get that on YouTube because it was too big to upload onto to the website that I was using. So I may figure that out and get that one up there for you soon. But for now, so let's just jump right in. So I've often had things that I've thought about, like aliens, and how do those fit into my worldview, and we'll kind of my initial thought was always like, I don't believe in aliens, and so I kind of have it written down a timeline, and I want to go through it a little bit and get some reactions. So hopefully this will be interesting. So I believe that the world was created by God 6,000 to 8,000, somewhere in there, probably closer to 6,000 as I look at it. And I believe that, if a God made the world and he loves the world and he wrote a book, so he gave us the Bible to communicate that to us. So that's just sort of foundation. If you don't believe in the Bible, then you're not going to possibly follow a lot of this. So that's the first conspiracy theory, if you're thinking about it that way. I don't think it's much of a conspiracy theory. I think that's the least controversial thing in this whole entire thing. Then I think that, well, if we're starting here, humans live to approximately 900 years in the Bible. That's recorded in the Bible. And they all spoke the same language. We know that because the languages weren't confused until the Tower of Babel. So there was almost 2,000 years of humanity on this earth, speaking the same language, living hundreds of years, and all interacting with each other. I believe that's when many of the things like the pyramids were built, many of the things like Hydroplate Theory, all these different Atlantis, all these different cultures and civilizations that we have found were built during this time. Humanity was more sophisticated. They weren't cavemen living in, scratching, on rocks. But I don't think that there was a lot of need for written communication at the time, as everyone spoke the same language. And so I don't think that there was a ton of written information. Now, this is where the alien technology, that things that we think of now as alien technology, I think a lot of this is where it started. I will talk about this in a minute when I get into the flood. But I think that ancient man somehow found a way to manipulate gravity with some sort of device, tools, whatever, because you have these objects that are flying around right now, and there's a couple accounts, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was. Can anybody help me out if you remember that guy's name? Lazaro. There it is. Lazaro talks about how gravity, that the propulsion system was basically manipulating gravity, and people's understanding of how gravity worked at that time sort of changed after some of it. He basically predicted some of those things based on what he was looking at. So take that for what it's worth. I don't know about that guy. I don't know anything about that, and I don't particularly care. But my thought is, if these are real, and they certainly seem like they are, they've been caught on camera from and many eyewitnesses about crafts from the Navy, the Air Force, all sorts of sources like that. The Pentagon has released things that there are objects out there that we can't exactly describe how they work. So my thinking is it's probably ancient technology that we don't understand, that they didn't that they used probably the same types of devices were what they used to build a lot of these huge structures. Well, then you had the flood. My theory with the flood goes back to hydroplate theory. If you've ever heard of that, Google it. There's a guy, Brian Nickel, who does a fantastic breakdown on YouTube, talks about hydroplate theory. And he talks about how before the flood, there wasn't, radioactivity did not pierce the firmament above and the firmament below. So this protected a lot of humans. That's why they had longer lifespans. There's actually more atmospheric pressure. And this caused animals to grow a lot larger. Obviously, if humans are living 900 years, animals are probably living a lot longer. So you get things like dinosaurs. You get things that are regular animals when they're smaller, but I believe reptiles do not stop growing. They grow until they die. So if something is only living 40 years now or 100 years now, an animal, then if it's living 10 times that, it's going to grow 10 times that size. So, and when we look at deep sea creatures right now, they're growing, they can grow larger at the deeper sea depths. Well, if there's more atmospheric pressure, if the atrophy is happening over time, these creatures have to get lower and lower to grow bigger and bigger. So these creatures could have been a lot closer to the surface, and you have explanations of sea creatures grabbing ships out of the water and swallowing them whole because they can come up to the surface a lot easier these days. So that describes, in my mind, a reasonable explanation for a lot of dinosaurs, or things that maybe we think are dinosaurs that are actually just large animals. And then also after the flood, I think we did hunt the remainder of the dinosaurs into extinction. But I also want to address the radiometric dating, the carbon dating that we do, because we're measuring the radioactive decay and basically saying if this much has happened, then that means that this thing is this many years old as when it was created. Well, the problem with that is that before the flood, there was no radioactivity in the atmosphere, because when the flood and the fountains of the deep exploded, and it's all in the hydroplate video. I would do a really bad job explaining this because I'm not a what's the term?
Geologist.
Yeah, I don't know like that much about the science behind it, but from everything I've heard, it explains why there is more like the radioactivity can come through the atmosphere, and now when it couldn't before. So anyway, so then you have so the flood, then you have people living a lot shorter. It's about 300 years. Then you have the Tower of Babel, language is confused. And then you have a much less sophisticated humanity in a different world. And I think that there's a possibility, this is just sort of my own sort of like theorizing, that some of these devices that they used and the knowledge that they used, probably, Noah's family had some idea on that, but they may not have been directly aware of how to use that. So they know it's possible, but they don't exactly know how to use that technology. And so but before man is able to sort of recreate these inventions, you have the confusion of the languages and the scattering all over the world. So you have people living, and there's actually a lot of evidence on this, a lot of videos. I mean, if you watch any, like talking about any of these ancient civilizations, a lot of them, they say, yeah, this seems there's a primitive, more primitive group of humans that settled onto the site after the more advanced humanity, and it's like, well, I mean, that just fits in with everything, I was talking about. There's a popular guy who talks about Unger Dryas. Is that how it's said? Unger Dryas event, some sort of cataclysmic event.
Younger.
Yeah, Younger Dryas. younger, well, I don't know, that talks about a cataclysmic event that changes the whole world and resets humanity. And then humanity, afterwards ends up settling on top of, a less sophisticated humanity, settling on top of this. And he thinks that explains all of it. Well, replace that with the flood, basically this theory here. So, I mean, it's a little controversial, but there's a lot of evidence for it. And a lot of the evidence that I would point to is the same evidence that he's pointing to. I would just fit it into a more biblical framework. So then you have, obviously all these years up to today. And then when they're finding these things, governments are, unearthing these things. And back in, I don't know, after Darwin and basically the spread of evolution, you have having people that can't understand how humans are basically saying that there's this like underdeveloped humanity in the past. And so there's no way that these objects that work, like, that spaceships could be any. I feel like the people that dug these up is what I'm trying to say, dug up these objects would say, oh, wow, this has to be from another world because humans aren't smart enough to do this in the past. So they discount the possibility of it being from Earth, prehistoric man. They think it's got to be some other world. And, and I'll just sort of throw out here, my biggest problem with evolution, I have many, but the biggest problem I have with evolution, and I've argued this with so many people, is like, no one can tell me why and when everything was created. Because you can't have, like you rewind the clock back, billions and millions and trillions of years, and you have nothing, and then you have an explosion. There's nobody can give me a reasonable explanation for how or why that would happen. And it takes more faith. Yeah, it takes more faith for me to believe that humanity just exploded than there was a God who was like, I'm going to make a universe and make rules in it and give them a book and a purpose and a plan and set them up and do it this way. That takes a lot less faith for me to believe that than for me to believe that that all of this just sort of happened. And then these things if things organize themselves over time and things get more complicated and humanity is advancing, well, I don't see that happening. I don't look around and I don't see anything getting more complicated as it goes along. I get to see things breaking down as it goes along. So
I will say it's important to differentiate between macroevolution and microevolution. So when a creationist says that we don't believe in evolution, what we're not saying, first of all, is that evolution, adaptation, is not right. So
yeah, I think that's a good point
to
explain.
Evolutionary theory, it basically says that there's original creation, or not creation, but original creature that came about. And we don't know how it went from non-life to life. So they're taking it on faith. They really are, that this is possible to go from non-life to life because it's never been observed. We've never seen anything that could get us close to a mechanism to have that happen, because even a single cell is so complex. In order to be able to function, it has to have a lot of things in place. You just can't make that. When Darwin proposed it, it was more, all that they could see was just like a cell with some stuff in it. You couldn't tell what it was. And so it's plausible that maybe that could have come from non-life, but now it's completely implausible. But at any rate, the idea is that you've got the tree of life, but creationists say, no, there is branching, but it's not from a single tree. It's more like a forest of life. You've got things, and then you've got branches, and some of them have died off. Sure, you do have extinct species, different specimens, but they all come from the same kind. So you have a cat that had enough genetic information to be able to diversify into as many branches as you see of cat kind, of all different sizes. But it's supported by the idea or the clear evidence that tigers and lions are able to mate and have offspring. So basically, if any creature that is able to mate with another creature is of the same kind. So horses, donkeys, zebras, all of those could potentially mate. You could have because they're all part of horse kind. Dogs have many different breeds, and wolves can interbreed with coyotes theoretically. I don't know that would happen in nature, but the fact is that they're the same kind, and they've speciated out of one kind. So that's the difference there. So people often look at Christians and say, "Oh, you don't believe in evolution. We've got clear evidence of evolution. You're just denying facts." No, we believe in speciation. We believe that there is trees, but it doesn't go back to one tree. It can't go back to one tree. It all dead ends in different places that you can't possibly link without doing some crazy mental gymnastics. So that's
we all believe that
throw in there.
Things evolve, but I don't believe in evolution. You know what I mean? Right. I don't believe that all things evolved from one thing or one cell or whatever, or stardust or whatever, it is. And I don't believe that there's a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Dad.
Yeah, the thing is there's adaptation, and that was the problem that Darwin got into. He saw the finches on Galapagos Islands, and he said, "Oh, there it is, evolution." When in fact it wasn't evolution; it was adaptation. Mm-hmm. And you had the changes in the size of the beaks depended upon food supply, rain, different factors. There could be a year or 2 years or 5 years a span that you may have the beaks larger and then go back the other way. If that process goes on too long and there isn't anything still in the gene pool, it can't further adapt. Mm-hmm. In other words, once something is there's no longer because all the small beaked, say for instance, small beaked species of not species, but adaptation of that particular finch, if all the small billed ones die out because it's such a long period of time that the long beaks are needed, then these long beaks that are intermarrying intermarrying are procreating just with long beaks, then that DNA is out. It's gone. It's just no longer there for them to adapt. And if there's a need for short bills and all they have is long bills, then the whole group dies out because of that. So there's adaptation, which is a good thing, but there's no new DNA. There's no new material that is going to come out of that. A bird can't get new DNA, new material, and evolve into a something else. It can pick some up from others of its kind and keep that material in there, but once that material is gone out of that subset, you can't add new material in unless it's another of the same kind that has that material for their children to pick that up, kind of thing. So that's where we call it evolution. It's not. It's adaptation. It's not evolution in the sense that it's evolving. It's just it's got the material within itself to make certain adjustments, certain changes.
But I'm okay if you call that evolving personally. I mean, I think adaptation is probably a better word for it, but I think things do evolve in that, like, there's a change from one thing to a next thing and adapting to its environment, which is evolving, which adaptation is basically what you're describing. I don't have any problem with that. I do think evolution in general is going to, is doomed to failure, because the more you look into things, the further you get to it, the more complicated you see that the world is, the more complicated the cell is.
Evolutionists that follow Darwin. I mean, they, all this stuff has been
Yeah, they start making
debunked
up other
except for the
things.
theory itself, but all his
Yeah.
source stuff and things just has not panned out. And I think you know, we've seen historically the science fail. My generation of peers had their tonsils taken out. I was one of the lucky ones that didn't have my tonsils taken out. But my two sisters got a 2-for-1 deal. They both had their tonsils taken out on the same day. It happened to be my birthday. And so I remember it as a little kid that I was at the house by myself when my sisters were in surgery in the hospital, having their tonsils taken out because, they had problems with their throats. And that was just what was done. I mean, hey, while you're in there taking them out, take them adenoids out. You don't need those either. That's all just, left over from evolution. Same with your appendix and things, just, you don't need it.
Yeah.
And we laugh at those things now because we know we've learned better. But it has only been a year or two ago that they were talking about junk DNA.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of stuff that still is, you will still find stuff occasionally on junk DNA. Well, there's no junk DNA. I mean, the science of junk DNA has been debunked. Hoax.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. But it's just a matter of time before all of this sort of falls down, and you can't be a serious person if you actually believe in all this stuff, But I think that with the absence of a compelling alternative and the fact that people, and I say compelling, I think it's obviously compelling to me, creation and everything there. But when people turn their brain off to God, and dismiss that as, that's hokey, can't do that, then you're left with nothing else except for these hollow, insane things. And then you look at the world around you and you assume that there's aliens on some other planet that came to Earth, like that, and you think that, and I think that this is evolution is one of the reasons why I think, racism is so egregious and allows people to dehumanize people so much. I feel like the Nazis dehumanized other people on this. When you look at Marxism and how he was tying that into evolution and when you read Marx and you see this sort of evolutionary thought and how the collective good and just the disregard for humanity as it was created. If you're not looking at humans and how they were created, you're looking at humans as they've evolved over time. And so, of course, the Aryan race is the superior race because they've evolved into this, whatever. Of course, I'm a part of the, most advanced race. I'm the smartest person, that's ever lived today. That it's easy
clearly because
to
we have
draw
this technological advantage.
Yeah, it's easy to draw these things, and then these savages that live over there. What I think that's one of the most destructive parts of this is a political channel. We talk about a lot of politics, and so it makes my skin crawl. I remember sitting in class and learning about Marx and thinking wow, this is an evolutionary mindset that allows you to get from this place to that place. And, that's my biggest critique with the Democratic Party. I love a lot of Democrats. I know a lot of Democrats, wonderful people. And, I was reading a lot of the comments that Jasmine and I got in our video, and some people's comments are just brutal, and some people would say things like, Democrats are like satanic, the party of Satan and all this kind of stuff. And it occurred to me that when you look at the world through a certain lens, it allows you to say something like that, which I don't think is fair to say. But at the same time, too, I also have a sense that what they're thinking is it's godless insofar as you're denying, the existence of God, which allows you to talk to people in a certain kind of way and treat people a certain kind of way. And it does allow you to get to that point. So I do think it can have a destructive element to it, but to lump all Democrats into this, basket, I think is a horrible thing to do. And I think it's just as a horrible thing to do as if you were to, I think what a lot of, Democrats do to Republicans, they're all racist. They're all, whatever, less than, so I don't think, but I think going back, I think that there's a string that ties all this together. And that's why this episode, is like the theory of everything to me, because all of these strings tie together. It's the things, the myths that we tell ourselves. And, I really want to have another episode. We did one on the role of government, but I want to talk about like the American mythology, what we think of and believe about ourselves as Americans, and how that relates. And so this episode had to come first before that one, because I think we even needed to boil it down to the listeners to this level, to like the very beginning, rolling back the clock, as I believe, to the beginning, rolling it forward, how some of these conspiracies, and how do we explain some of the things around the world that don't seem to fit anywhere in the puzzle. This gives a place to some of those things that is, to me, plausible. And I mean, now aliens could be from another planet. I don't know. We could have, people from other planets, little green men, but I think that when you look at a lot of these like abductions and the stories about these abductions, something that you find in a lot of them is sort of a almost like a demonic like experience, where they're like taken and like even some are like told like weird revelations about themselves or about whatever, or like killing an animal, sort of culty, kind of very like kind of make your skin crawl. And so I think that some of these alien abductions are demonic interactions, if I'm being blunt about it. And I think that, so I don't necessarily buy that sort of storyline. And I don't think that, so if we're talking about these spacecrafts and alien technology, I think that's a prehistoric technology. If we're talking about actual aliens, I don't believe in aliens per se. And if there is something that's flying these ships from another planet, I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think about that? I don't think there's evidence for it, but
Christians are intolerably centrist. So whenever a Christian is a Democrat, they're usually willing to listen to their opponents. Whenever a Christian is a Republican, they're willing to listen to their opponents. And truly actually try to understand. There may be differences of opinion in the end, but there's still that belief that the truth is knowable, and that we have the core of it together in the Bible. So while I think there are believers who believe that aliens do exist, and some that give them credit for things that I wouldn't necessarily, like flying spaceships to Earth and thousands of years ago and then having them buried or whatever. I think there's room for that. I don't find it a compelling argument, but I'm not going to throw it out. And what's crazy to me is that is now becoming a mainline position, even though Christians have held that kind of conspiratorial attitude, like the government's covering stuff up. The government is, run by the devil. We've held that for a long time. What's funny is how many people on the godless side are actually joining in that same argument, that the government is covering things up. We've got spaceships. Aliens are real. They're abducting people. It's really interesting what kind of a commonality there is between that. So, but I think as Christians, I can't give credit to demons for some of the stuff that people are claiming happened to them. I think there's a power of suggestion that happens, and that's a factor. But I think that there are probably demons doing things that are making people believe that they're, so people like, oh, witches never existed, flying people never existed, like riding around on brooms in the Middle Ages, that was just fantastical flights of fancy, not actual flights. But I could totally see if there are spiritual beings that are able to interact with matter, that you could justifiably call an alien. I can't see why they wouldn't be able to cause flight, you know? So I'm just like, I see no problem with the idea that witches flew, that they spoke and things happened because they had a demon that was serving them. And so but I don't think that it is necessary to believe that in order to be. You don't have to believe in full demons going crazy in the world to be a Christian. You have to believe in the core of Scripture, you know. So, yeah.
There's kind of a couple things running through my mind right now, and the things that you talked about early on. You talked about some of the things like the pyramids and maybe the Aztec pyramids and things like that being pre-flood. I'm not saying it couldn't be, but it seems improbable to me because of a worldwide flood and the damage that it did, that they would be as well intact as they are, unless they somehow got, it'd have to be some kind of water damage and, underwater for a while before the water seeded. I think they would be more, I think it would be in worse shape than they are. I'm of the opinion that the pyramids are post-flood. And even in the short period of time since the flood to now, a couple thousand years, whatever, there's a lot of things that have been lost as far as the ability to do things. We have a current history. You have Tesla doing these things, and now they're trying to go back and figure out, now, how did he do it?
How do you do it?
We have that because we have some of the writing about it, where if he had just talked about these things or done these things, and there was no way to go back and say these things, people would say, well, he was an alien or whatever, they would give it, some kind of, 500 years from now, had we not had some of that writing and be able to do some of the experiments and have some idea of what he did, he would have been looked at as, or what he did as, some kind of alien technology that somehow we got hold of, blah, 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 whatever type thing. And I'm just saying that the ability of people to do phenomenal things and those things being lost. I mean, in the year 2000, we had to go hunt down programmers that could do certain type of programming language because it was lost almost, Indian languages, Indian things about, there's a lot of things that Indians knew, the frontiersmen knew. Man, we can't hardly live, 2 days out in the woods without our, thermos and our whatever. We'd be dead, even without lions and tigers and bears. It's just all the microbes that would take us out, not knowing what to eat. We'd be eating poison berries out there. So I don't think there's a good case for some of the things that you mentioned being pre-flood. But I'm not saying it doesn't, it just doesn't seem to fit well with me, but nonetheless, so that was just one thing. When you talk about things that grow larger over time, my understanding is your ears don't stop growing. That when you get to be 100 years old, you have, do your ears hang low? Do they wobble to and fro? You may be old. Yeah. One thing too that I also think when it comes to like carbon dating or, various things along that line, is that if God created things with age, which seems to be what Genesis is saying, if he created the stars on the fourth day, created Earth, Earth is actually older than the stars. Then he created those stars with age, in the sense that,
with
we
light
look
in
and we see
transit.
that they're further back from each other But if we see them at all, there had to have been there with light coming towards us, stretched out in a matter of, that long. First time man looked at stars, Adam on the first night, after he was created, saw stars that already had the appearance of age, the same way as he had the appearance of age. He was created, and 5 minutes after he was created, somebody could look at him, some scientists, and go like, yeah, he's 30 years old, or he's 20 or whatever age appearance he had, at that time. So that's part of the problem of, well, there's a couple things that when scientists say millions of years for stuff, first of all, if God created it, he created it with age. The dirt and the first earth, pre-flood had dirt and plants that came up immediately, all of those kinds of things that would have the appearance of age. And the second thing is just what damage was done at creation. At the flood, that also causes there to be this appearance of age. And we know that it used to be said that oil took these millions of years. Well, you can make oil in your backyard, in your garage, under pressure. You can actually make diamonds, you can make oil. These are things that can be made just by pressure. They don't take millions of years. You just have to have the right conditions, and the flood seems to have created those conditions of vast amounts of vegetation being covered, compressed, and came about to make oil.
Natural gas,
those kinds of things.
Coal.
You also have these eruptions, earthquakes, and things like that a week after a eruption, you go out and you look around, and it looks like it has the appearance of being much older in that area than it would otherwise. It just throws the whole thing off.
Yeah.
Along that line. I think our problem with aliens is, I think the more we look at the science of evolution and see the difficulties, as I think Matthew alluded to, that there are some things that can't evolve. They have to come as a unit in order for the function, because if there's any kind of evolution, it wouldn't make it to the next step. It can't make it to the next step without all the steps being, at the same time. So there's a number of things along that line that are problematic, and the whole time thing. So aliens is a good answer, sorta. Well, the aliens came here and planted, this stuff in the DNA and and did all these things, planted it here. And
where the aliens come from.
Yeah. But then you got to go back to first cause. Where did the aliens come from? We don't know, because we haven't studied them, because, and if they're,
it's just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, you're kicking, right. I think so. Yeah. I think, though, as Christians who might believe in aliens, I think there's a problematic issue, and that is, where do they fit? I think that if there was going to be an alien encounter, I think, again, God would prepare us for that, or told us, because they are, he's told us about angels and man is a little lower than angels. Where do aliens fit in? They have the same amount of time, quote unquote, to evolve or to get the technology right as we do, because they were created on the fourth day. So maybe they're a little bit ahead of us by a day or two, because so because it's when it stars. I think it's fourth day. I'm hesitating now, thinking about, is it the fourth day? Things get rusty sometimes. But where do they fit? Are they higher than the angels? Lower than the angels? Are they lower than us, higher than us? You know, where they fit in that? You
And
know,
that's kind of
are they spiritual beings? Are they,
Mhm.
you know, material like us? We obviously know that they either have to be without sin, or if they have sinned, you know, rebelled against God in some way, there's no redemption for them because of the way that we were redeemed through the blood of Christ, Him becoming our kinsman redeemer, those kinds of things. So there's a number of things that just become problematic as you look at Scripture and you say, okay, if there are aliens, you know, and it's if, does that really fit well?
Mhm.
And I think
Yeah.
it's much easier to say, you know, we don't have to go in an evolutionary thought. Evolutionists say because life evolved here and all of those gazillions of stars out there, then surely it's happened somewhere else because the conditions would be right.
Right.
And you know,
Well,
they figured out how somehow to travel through space at these high rates of speed, and not be pulverized by the dust that's out there in space that would, you know, pull apart anything that we would have to travel at that kind of speed. So
they would
there's
have
all
to
kinds of
travel
problems with
so
space
fast.
travel, just in the physics of it. They would have to overcome those things. And you know, in God's plan of creation, they would have to have done some pretty phenomenal things in the last 6,000 years.
Mhm.
Not that they couldn't if there were such beings, but it seems scripturally improbable and
Yeah.
probably more, you know, there's no reason to do it. Why couldn't God just create everything out there and there'd be just life here? That seems the way that it's written. And
Yeah.
I don't see any reason to theorize anything else because I don't believe in evolution, you know, fits to begin with. So why would I
Mhm.
try to evolve them, some others, you know, some other
Yeah.
thing out there?
I have a. Sorry.
All
I've just
right.
got two trajectories here. For one, um, whenever you look at science fiction and we try to imagine aliens or we try to imagine other species for our fantasy worlds like the elves and the dwarves and all that, basically we're taking only what we know, humanity, and the core is basically human. All of these different species essentially act like some group of humans out there kind of do. There's almost always like a based on sort of a prototype, like these are like the Spartans and these are like the whoever and the whatever. Like these are more like Germans. Oh, we'll call them elves and they'll have some other quirks to make them not look quite like Germans. Or whatever. There's always this base, our knowledge of our basic ability to understand aliens is always based on humanity. It's because it's all we know. So when we think, oh, there's aliens out there, they're going to be like us. If there were aliens, they wouldn't be like us. They wouldn't be anything like the aliens that we see in any of the movies. There's no movie that would accurately represent an alien thought pattern. So um, people are really attached to the idea of aliens, but they're really attached to having more people like them. Is my first point. More people who are somewhat like them. It's all over Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica, and all of those have aliens that are basically humans, only with different quirks. So there, there's that. I wish I could remember the other one, but somebody else talk while I figure it out.
Okay, I'll address these things going backwards that Dad said in response to what I was saying. So aliens, the only thing, and like I said, I think the most probable thing is they're prehistoric, whatever. But if they are actually aliens out there, the only way I can fit that into my worldview is that some of these things talked about in Revelation, the scorpion that shoots the fire and all the bizarre things, is that if there is something out there, they're not human-like, they're not an intelligent, evolved, because I don't believe in evolution. I don't believe that they're advanced beyond us. I believe that they are something like we have animals right now that can ride around. What's an animal that rides around on another animal? I mean, like none of them really do, but you could put monkeys can ride. Yeah, monkeys can ride on the backs of horses, whatever. It's not necessarily natural, whatever, but if there was some sort of like
elephants, monkeys and elephants would be great.
That is, if there are, I would think that there would be like animals that just have the ability to go through space, and somehow they like if there's what am I trying to say? If there's like locusts that like have these exoshells, whatever, and they can do all these things, they're like space locusts that they're just flying around out there, and they happen to land on Earth and they terrorize us in the last days, and that would be the only way I could see that there's some sort of alien other life form out there and how that interacts with humanity. But I don't think that this is some sort of, but I still think that in that sense, they fit into God's plan, God's plan for the punishment of Earth at the end times. That's the only way that it makes sense for me. And that kind of, to me, makes a little bit of sense with Revelation. A lot of these things that I don't really understand how it works, and they're describing creatures with 4 heads, whatever. Well, I don't know if that's what it takes to get through space, but I don't necessarily, I think that they're come equipped or would become equipped to handle the space travel and then do here and carry out the purpose of which they were created for. And then, but I don't necessarily think that they're flying on ships. They're flying, or if they are, I mean, I don't know. I can't really wrap my head around that unless, like an ant builds an ant hill and then they all get in it. These creatures on some other world with some ability to do whatever are building this ship, but it's more animalistic. And it is to get on that ship and launch themselves through space because they have the ability to somehow alter gravity around it. I don't know. I mean, this this gets really, really wild right now, but that's the only way I can make this make sense, because like you said, I can't fit it in there. And then I want to address the whole, that's why I started with, I can't get down with evolution, because it's just a fairy wand of time. So if you use aliens to explain humanity and how, or not even humanity, but to explain evolution as, because plants have to have oxygen. So oxygen came before plants. And then, these things have to coexist together in order to make things happen. So one can't form without the other. And then, but you're talking about millions of things happening at the same time. And like you said, you almost have to like put aliens, some other hand in there. Because if you don't want to use God, like you've got to put something else in there. But then you have to explain aliens, and then you're just sort of rewinding the clock back. Okay, Earth has been here for 6 billion years, and it was helped out with alien technology. But those aliens have been here for trillions and trillions of years. It's just you're using what I call the fairy wand magic of time. Time is just your fairy wand, and it makes all this work. And I don't buy that. I don't have enough faith. Sorry, I'm just a lack of faith. Just a person with a lack of faith. And then I'll let you talk. And yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
So the other problem is that if you put a long span of time, it messes up your trajectory. So, for instance, with humanity, let's say supposedly Homo sapiens have been around 100,000 years, and only in the very, very minuscule, tiny fraction of it, the last, say 10,000 years, have they been able to do anything worth saying. So you have this trajectory of evolution where like nothing is basically happening. They're Homo sapiens already, but they're able to scratch on rocks and make rudimentary tools, and that's it. And then all of a sudden, woo! Like they take off into the sky. It doesn't make any sense. You create more problems by believing that than you solve by believing that humanity has had this long to evolve. And then you get these weird things like civilizations such as Atlantis, which were apparently advanced to the Greeks, and they seem to have multiple accounts, and there's multiple accounts of those advanced civilizations existing and then being wiped out by a flood. And you have to have like cyclical humanity to try to make that work, and then you still have material remains difficulties. So you end up with problems no matter what you do. Anytime that you add that much time, so you have to fix it some way. And the best solution is to say that humanity's only been around for 6,000 years. That's about the only way I can think of to do it. The other thing I was going to say about aliens, though, because I remember what it was that all Christians believe in two types of aliens. You believe in God and angels. Our God is a God who is immaterial, but can take material form. He is alien to us. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. So we believe that there is a alien who is responsible for everything being, the entirety of the material universe, and that he created, for some reason, which he has chosen not to explain to us, and I would say probably has forbidden those angels from doing. He's created spiritual beings that also have the ability to take on a human form, and to interact with humans in a way. And those are angels and demons, which are the same thing, but a different allegiance. So angels being, the ones who serve God, and then the demons being the ones who have served the betrayer, Satan, the enemy of God, the person who set himself up against God. And I call him a person because he's an alien, but he's a person. So these are intelligences, these are minds, and that have spiritual form and can take on bodily form. And then we are both spirit and body as humans, which differentiates us from the animals. And if you don't believe that, then you have some explaining to do as well. So anyways, enough of that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I wanted to say, and Dad, I think you have some strong points, and I think there are some strong points for the pyramids and all these like structures being made after the flood. But I think the reason why I personally feel like they were pre-flood is because, it's like you were saying, when they test, a piece of wood is like stuck down in the dirt, and they radiometric, carbon date or whatever this in, and they're, measuring that radioactive decay on this side of the stick. And then they measure this side, and it comes out 20 million years of difference, and it's like, oh, well, I mean, this side says it's 200 million. This side says it's 180 million. So it's 190 million years old, like that we can definitely confidently say this, definitely confidence. And it's like, you can't confidently say that, like in my mind, like that's not science. Like that's just as ridiculous as the fairy wand of time. But when it comes to the age of the pyramids and what you're talking about, I think that the purpose of the flood was to wipe out humanity, and obviously it covered the entire face of the earth. And what's to say that there weren't a other structures on top of the pyramids, wooden structures or other things that were completely wiped away and, pulverized and crushed, that took some of the blunt of these things. That there's like a huge, if you look at what's the cat structure, the Sphinx? Yeah. Sphinx.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's
water damaged,
totally damaged, like by water. And there's water damage on the pyramids. And to me, thinking that there might be something that was over that was just completely wiped away, and all you're left with was the base. What if there was a structure on top of the pyramids that actually connected the pyramids, and that was just the cornerstone on this end and the cornerstone on this end, and there was something, wooden or some other kind of thing across. A bridge. And, you're talking about the entire Sahara Desert at one time. Well, not the entire, but a lot of the Sahara was underwater at some point, and this was pushed up. So it's possible that in that place that it wasn't it was covered and washed out, and humans were wiped away, but it wasn't pulverized in the way some other parts of the earth potentially were, just like pulverized by water rushing over and over. I mean, you look at the bottom of a lake bed, there's some places where the water rushes over, and it's more destructive in that area than it would be if you're close to the shore, where there's less water running over, and then that goes away first. So I mean,
I don't know. It's not something I've studied. I just it just kind of off the top of my head, I'm thinking about the fact that there are people. There seems to be closer to other events that you have this guy named Tut and some information. It seems that there's enough concurrent or things linearly more of a written history that you can follow back to that point and kind of get more of a fixed date because of the bodies inside the tomb or something like that, and the time frame, those kinds of things. So, but again,
but there's a lot of
I don't know. I'm not fixed on it. It just doesn't seem, just gut just doesn't seem right.
It just fits better with me. I think that there's a lot of people that say that the pyramids were not actually tombs, that there were no bodies found in them. And so they just, back in the 19, whatever, it's just like in the 1900s, people just like drew maps and, whatever, okay, dividing up all these colonies and then with no regard for what's inside. I mean, the British just went around the world, around the globe, and screwed up a bunch of stuff. And
they claim on everything, right? Plant the flag.
And then divided these countries and said, all right, you're on your own. And then these two tribes are like, but we're in the same country, ruled by this government over here, but we're completely different people and we should have our own sovereignty. I mean, like the lines don't even make sense. But the point is like people just sort of projected onto it like, oh, it's a tomb. All these things are tombs. And okay, well, where's the evidence that this is a tomb? Did they find bodies in it? No, we just call this the room where, whatever. They had mummies. I mean, it's probably a tomb, right? So and some of it might have been a tomb and it might have been used in that, but I saw a guy who made a pretty compelling case that they had nothing to do with tombs and it was just some British people that just assumed, because when you're looking at something, you're trying to make an argument.
Again, you may, look more into it than I do. I'm just shooting from the hip saying, I don't know.
But
one of those things I'd have to be convinced.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm right or anything. I just, whatever. I think Matt had something.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So I actually just looked it up. The distance between Tut's tomb and generally where the kings were buried and Luxor, in Luxor, is a long way from Gaza. I'm trying to find a scale here. It looks like about 100 miles, just looking at it on a map. So I could probably find a more compelling thing. But at any rate, the kings were typically buried in tombs and temples and things like that. They were a lot in Luxor. That's where Tut was. You don't find a lot of tombs around the Great Pyramids except for ones that have been like highly rated. But it really wasn't. There's not compelling evidence that they were used for tombs. Also, I've actually studied a bit of Egyptology when I was trying to do some research to figure out about the Exodus, and I found out that Egyptologists, I've always been fascinated by it, but they always present it on the TV programs as if this is all set science. Yeah. But when you really get into it, there are 4 accepted timelines. 4 accepted timelines that are hundreds of years apart for just like the relatively recent events. If you were to go back to closer to the flood, it's all mixed up. Nobody knows what's accurate and what's not. It's very suspicious. It's very suspect, kind of like the king's lists in Babylonia. You go back to the earliest 10 kings and it says they reigned for 29,000 years or something, and you're like, what? So yeah, it's like that doesn't seem very likely.
Oh yeah, great contribution there. So I think what you're saying, it points to more of the concept to me that like it's so the dogma around Egyptologists and the dogma about evolution and the dogma that we've just introduced into looking at this ancient civilizations and looking at all these things and even aliens now. It's so unhelpful, and it gives you so many, like if you start in this place, you go to this next place that's a logical progression, but you shouldn't have started with this base assumption. That's the problem that I get into a lot. And something Dad said a long time ago that I have scratched down on this paper is how civilization sort of reset, and then people go back and they go like, and Tesla, the example with Tesla, like what was he doing? Like there's a volcano in 638 or 642, something like that. And there's several recordings in all over the world that like for 2 years, basically there was only 4 hours of sunlight because there was so much ash in the cloud, and people just decided that the sun was just going to shine for 4 hours a day now. Like we just get this extended night. There was famines. There was probably mass, deaths and things happened in this year. And that's something like, I really don't know that I've ever heard of that, and it's like, why am I just now finding out about this 2 years where, you hear about the Black Plague, you hear about all these different things but you don't hear about that, and it's because
the 2 years that the world ended.
Yeah, we're still learning about these things. I watch a lot of documentaries about, what is it, 11 something, when the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age, and how we don't really know what happened, but basically there's just this like famines and people moving all the world, and the sea people came in and messed everybody up, and the Egyptian empire fell, and then you had and there's so many like mysteries around it, but I feel like there's a lot of mysteries around it because for the first time, a lot of people just said, we're going to not say what happened. We're going to look at a bunch of different things. And I feel like it's one of the times in history where you can point to where people were actually kind of like, okay, there's this theory and there's that theory, and there's this that happened in that time period and this that happened in that time period. And I love that. I like that we can look at things through that lens of like, there's plenty of alternate sort of theories out here. There's plenty of things that could happen. We know something did happen. Nobody's arguing that something didn't happen, but we're looking at it with the honest, open interpretation of what happened. I think we need to go back and do that with Egypt. I think we need to specifically, because like you said, there's 4 different accepted timelines. Okay, nobody knows that. They get on these shows and talking as if like this is what all the scientists say, it's turned into sort of the mask mandate, this is the science, and so yeah, I don't think that's very helpful, but I just thought that was interesting because if we're just now, not just now, but I'm just now, but just recently in the last, I think this guy back in the 80s when he started looking into a lot of these things with the 1630 Greece volcano that happened and theorizing about that and gathering data. I mean, it took years to gather the data, and they were looking at tree rings and noticing that if you cut down these trees and you look back, and it's funny because he said there's 7,500 years worth of data in tree rings. That's all they have. And I'm like, that's all they have, and the world is millions of years old, and that's all they have is 7,000 years. Okay, like we're saying the world is 6,000, but like I'm willing to accept that there might be 1,000. Like a lot of even Christians, like will say, well, maybe there's 8,000, 6 to 8. I think that's the generally accepted range. I tend to be a little bit on the personally a little bit more conservative, but for the purpose of this conversation, not conservative, a little bit more on like it could go up to 8,000. That doesn't really affect anything in my broader like arc here that I've given from creation to Babel to Jesus to today. It doesn't really change a whole lot in there for me. But
if
I don't know
if there were massive trees, those massive trees didn't just have one ring. If the world was created with massive trees, they had 1,000 rings to begin with. So that really still falls within the 6,000 year history. So
yeah, that's interesting. And that's something that, the only thing that I'm very comfortable with how to explain the carbon dating, because I've looked into that a lot, and the hydroplate theory, which I really recommend anybody watch this, go look up Brian Nichols, the hydroplate theory, and look into that because it is spectacularly well done, in my opinion. And then but I don't know about the ice, when they take the ice shelves out, but I think that, if you're talking about how we can get into climate change for a minute, and Matt mentioned this earlier, is you have this, humans went along for million or 100,000 years with just like, they're all just scratching rocks, and then all of a sudden, boom, it just takes off, just this evolutionary, just like complete advancement thing, and And then, you know, if you're looking at climate change, and, you know, you look at carbon dates, you look at, you know, the environment was all fairly stable, whatever. And then just these last, you know, several years is just all this, you know, the invention of whatever, and just boom, you see this huge spike again, you know, and you're like, well, it's humans made, you know. But I think that and I think that's why a lot of, you know, people on the right that are more, you know, that evolution, you know, believe in the evolution, you know, as a theory, they would look at that and go, well, it's debunked for, you know, X, Y, and Z reason, and it's not, you know, whatever. But I think as a Christian, coming from the perspective of, okay, you've had this much climate variation in 6,000 years, and you do have a spike, then that is a problem. That is something that we can look at and going like, we're supposed to be stewards of this planet. You know, we're supposed to, you know, have dominion of the earth. We need to be responsible. And so taking a look at some of the climate concerns, I think is really in Christians' best interest. I'm not saying we should just get on the side of all these climate, you know, change activists per se, but I think that it's worth investigating some of the, if the temperature is increasing at the rate they are and humans are contributing, what can humanity do to help stabilize that? You know, we've only got one planet, you know, and God said to take care of it. We should be taking care of it. That's my opinion. So I think Christians should be more open to the idea of some of the things in climate change than we have been. I think that a lot of Republicans just don't think about it in this context. I think that they just listen to people that just sort of like, oh, it's all hoax, you know, and just let it go, or they don't, you know, aren't particularly interested, you know. But I think that we should be, you know, at least a certain group of Christianity should be concerned with these things and should be looking into these things, and not just jumping onto a political party's coattails and following it. I don't think that does well for us, you know, in the community, the Christian community. So I didn't really expect to talk about climate change, but
from a biblical standpoint, when you look at it, in this story of Genesis before the flood, it says that all humanity was only evil always. That's all that they thought about. And it says that even the animals had corrupted their way. That is the best translation of the Hebrew. Pretty much always comes out to that. Even the animals had corrupted their way. So when God destroyed the earth, it was because the animals were off. Something was wrong. And then God saved a core of animals. And I think ever since the flood, even those core of animals that God saved have been continuing to corrupt their way. There's something that is happening, an overflow of the sin nature in humanity, and it's outworking in the world into the animal world. And that's why you have so much nature being red in tooth and claw, as Darwin observed. You know, nature was not meant to destroy itself the way that it does, and because it does that, it's actually causing the world to destabilize as far as the climate, because as we know, the plants affect the breathable oxygen, and the plants are affected by the insects and the the herbivores that eat them. So all of these attributes, I think, of sin could be, without much reach, attributed to the world around us. In other words, sin is corrupting the world around us. That's why we have the many different things that we have, is because one, God has to judge individual national sins. So a nation sins and God allows something terrible to happen to them, like a tornado or an earthquake or other things that have been typically attributed to God, acts of God. You know, that's what insurance, puts us like, we don't cover acts of God because it's been typically understood that God is the judge of the earth, that he has to curb sin. He has to remind us who's boss. But over the span of time, you see nature becoming more and more hostile to mankind as mankind stretches more to take command of it. And the more that we've actually taken command of the earth and mined its minerals and strip mined the the granite and all of the coal underneath it, and we find that the Earth is kind of kicking back at us. The nature is biting us in a way, and we find nature destabilized and the climate changing. And I don't think any of that's a coincidence. And I think that there's a good chance that many of the events in Revelation are at least tangentially related to climate change from a biblical standpoint. I don't see how you could see it any other way. So, personally,
yeah, I would agree. We were given dominion over the earth. We are responsible as stewards for the earth, and government's purpose is to punish evildoers. And so when you have businesses that pollute and destroy and whatever, that becomes everybody's problem. And so government is there for those purposes. Remember growing up and the living in Cleveland, there's a river that comes out of Lake Erie called Cuyahoga. Indian name, good Indian name. Don't ask me how to spell it. I think I did finally learn how to spell it at the end of 12th grade. Cuyahoga River. I probably learned it before then, but still, it's one of those things. But the Cuyahoga caught fire, and the Lake Erie was not suitable to swim in, and that has changed. The Cuyahoga, best I know, I haven't been back there in years, is more like water should be. The same way with Lake Erie, it's more like water should be, and people actually go to the beach.
Yeah,
I don't know at what risk they go to the beach, but they go to the beach. So, but it's been cleaned, and so that those kinds of things need to happen. And I think that's again part of government's responsibility is to make sure that we protect the environment. The problem comes when we have some of these schemes where you're buying carbon
credits.
Carbon credits and things like that, and to what extent is the and there's a lot of lying going on, a lot of falsification of data, and that's what makes it hard to do, is when you have people that are so pro environment that they're willing to lie and falsify data and those kinds of things, then that makes it difficult for those who are willing to go a certain distance.
Poisons the argument,
or changing the measurements and things and saying, this is where it was before, but now we're here. But then don't tell you, we changed how we do this measure. Yeah. And actually we would be here, but now we're measuring this, but we're not telling you that. So it looks like this, stuff like that going on. So, that's part of our responsibility. And I agree with you. I mean, I'm one of those, I recycle, as best I can. I make that extra effort to do that. Just because I feel it's it's the right thing to do. It's being a good steward. I'm thankful that there are recycled, it's become a thing, that we do recycle. We should have done it a long time ago. Well, we did during World War II. Things were recycled, but we should have kept it. We got way too prosperous and way too uncaring in that regard. Not sure where that goes with aliens. So,
no, I like it because you got me up on my soapbox, right? The whole thing of Democrats take things too far and Republicans don't care. It's like, and the Republicans should care and Democrats shouldn't take things so far. And I think that's a good example in a nutshell. Yeah, I don't know how that exactly ties in there, but you guys want to talk about giants for a second? The Nephilim?
I want to talk about democratic aliens real quick, but all right.
No, we're not going to do that.
That'd be fun.
This is one that's complicated for me, and I just throw it in here as we're wrapping up. And so, you guys can throw your final thoughts as you're reacting to this, because this episode's kind of being a little bit longer, and that's okay. But the Nephilim, and when it talks about the what is it, the sons of men?
The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive and intermarried with them.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
their
exactly.
children were men of renown.
Yeah,
that is a near
has
quote.
Always thrown me into like just a loop. Like, wait, what? Like, what does this mean? And I've watched too many documentaries that make no sense. I've watched, it's like reading Revelation. It's like, I just have to accept that there's some of this that I'm not going to understand, and I think that's, I might leave it at that, with this, but I was wondering if you guys had any like takes and how that possibly fits into any of this, if it does at all. I don't have a solid answer for this one outside of,
early on.
Yeah, go ahead.
So early on in history, you see God taking a very direct and heavy-handed approach to a lot of things. Sin spread in the world, and sin has spread since then. We've got the Holocaust, we've got the Pol Pot's murderings, and you don't see God coming down and smacking down those individuals. But he did smack down the people before the flood. He smacked down Babylon. And the easiest way to think about it is that early on, anything early on in a timeline that you change has humongous effects. So in order to make a large correction to keep something from becoming prevalent, I think God took drastic action at the beginning. And actually, the Nephilim is one of the reasons that is given for the flood itself, is that God wanted to wipe out the Nephilim. But basically, I think it's God taking a hardline stance of saying, I'm not going to allow the aliens, the demons, to mess with the human genetics. I'm going to stop that. Don't know how they did it, but the best reading of the scriptures is that the sons of God almost always refers to the angels, and they were demons, those who followed Satan, that then intermarried somehow with human women. Don't know how that was achieved. And I don't think God wanted us to know that, but he did prohibit that. He punished it severely, along with the corruption of the animal kingdom and the corruption that has happened from there. But it's actually several flood stories actually talk about the half humans that intermarried with the gods, or so to speak, in several different things. So it's not confined only to the scriptures. This is actually multiple different cultures' memory of the events that caused the flood, attributed to the Nephilim, the half humans. So I don't think it's a far stretch to say that is the best interpretation of it that I can give. Not one that I particularly like, but it's what I believe. So
I think that's interesting, because that to me, the alien quote unquote technology solves a lot of the problems for me on how a lot of things were built. But to do that, I have to place the pyramids and things before the flood to do that. I think your explanation was
surviving technology that then eventually was lost after the flood, but it could be a pre-flood technology that survived the flood.
Yeah, and you're right, and that's not a far stretch. Just moving the timeline up a little bit, but I don't necessarily personally don't think you have to too much. I think that there's a lot of evidence, that these things were before the flood, but even if they're not, like you said, it doesn't necessarily change that. And I think it fits together decently in the puzzle. That's interesting you said that. I think that in every documentary that I watch, whether it's Christians talking and trying to explain it, a lot of them don't want to say what you just said. You know,
Yeah.
I think that's an uncomfortable thing to say out loud and put yourself out
It
there
really
for.
is.
And so, that's the point of this podcast, is to say things and be.
Well, I think the difficulty I have, with that interpretation is,
Mhm.
as something changed about angels, or was it just demon angels, fallen angels, that would make that possible? Because we have a statement by Jesus, that in the, in heaven, we will be like the angels, neither given in marriage or taken in marriage, type thing.
Yeah.
So it seems to be that angelic beings are sexless.
Mhm. But they
So,
also,
or if they have gender, it's not for procreation or marriage or whatever. And maybe they do have gender as far as, that goes.
Or
maybe for them, type thing. But so
I
there's
don't think
some
they do.
difficulties understanding, how do you take what Jesus says? Is it a statement, that's true of all angels, or just true at that time, or whatever? So, and then you have this issue of, if they're children and they're only half human and half fallen angels who have special abilities, there's something I just can't wrap my head around that one being a possibility.
Well,
Even though the text seems to say that, type thing, and that term, sons of God, does tend to be that way. But there's other places where sons of God doesn't necessarily mean that. And so I tend to think that, it has to do with the descendants of Seth and the descendants of Cain.
Mhm.
Even though it's problematic, and men of renown, or doesn't necessarily mean, I was going to say necessarily mean evil or good, but just have a reputation. But we do know that there are giants even after the flood, because you have
Goliath.
David and Goliath's brothers. You have this king that's like 13 foot long, possibly, 13 foot tall. Talk about his bed being, X number, feet, unless he was just trying to impress.
I think it was Og, king of Bashan. Yeah.
Huh?
I believe it was Og, king of Bashan.
Yeah. So is he just trying to impress people, or we just needed more room for his concubines, or what? I don't know. Maybe, it seems to indicate his height, though.
Yeah.
So, there are that. Of course, we know the Zulus and things in our current day, are very tall, 7 foot tall. And we even have basketball players that reach those heights. So it, how did we get off into that point about being aliens and all? I'm not sure where we went, how we got there. I'm just saying, I think there's other interpretations. I think they all have difficulties with them because of what the text seems to be saying. But there are also within that text other possibilities of, interpretation there. Nothing's really, like, wow, you're way off. It's just, again, like the pre-flood thing that I said before. That one's just one. It just doesn't seem to be likely. There seems to be some real problems with going down that path.
Some of them, though, are not as real as so. With angels, we know that multiple can inhabit one body, right? As in one person. There was the man who was inhabited by multiple demons. I believe Mary had 7 demons that were cast out of her. So we know that they can do that, but they also appear in physical form and interact with people multiple times in Scripture. So if they are physical then they would, I assume, have DNA. So I think that there is a form that they can take that is
where do you have, I mean, other than Jesus and the angels that God gave the appearance of having bodies
Josh.
Christ incarnate. Jesus is different because he's incarnated.
Yeah.
Where else
Joshua.
do you have, unless maybe you're talking about the Antichrist or something?
Well,
No,
when
Where else do
the
you have
angel came
scripture?
to Joshua and told him, what did he tell him? Like,
Okay.
Yeah.
it seems
Yeah,
to
but
be
is
like a
that just
physical
a
person that
temporary
walked up to
body?
him.
Could that body, is it just a
Yeah.
body to see, or is it a body that could, slap
Yeah.
him
Well, my
across the
point is,
face or grab his
yeah,
wife and, seduce her or something? I mean,
yeah.
I don't
I don't
know.
think that it would be natural for demons to be able to interact sexually with humans, but I think that the best interpretation of that is that they did in some way. And I think the best rationale for that is not that they needed to procreate. The rationale for that is that the demons wanted to corrupt human seed, to corrupt the human line, to inject something foreign into the humanity, to to try to get around God's plan of using humans
Seed of the
to be
woman.
the line of Jesus. Yeah, that was exactly it. And that part of it is the best explanation of the passage, as far as I've been able to see it, from just looking at the wording and the implications and following the line of logic in those throughout Genesis. It looks like it was a determined effort on the part of the demons to thwart the seed of Christ, or this Christ being the seed of Adam. You just inject a foreign element in there, make them the mightiest people around, and then through competition, they went out. God's thwarted. So there's so many points where you see the devil trying to thwart God's plan, where they're killing all of the firstborn of the Hebrews, to killing the male children of Bethlehem, to this, to the trying to corrupt early on, trying to corrupt it. And I think we see really with the flood, God saying, "No, I'm going to stop that every time." And then if there was more tampering that caused the they weren't called the Nephilim, they were the what was Goliath's
Borgs.
people?
No.
Huh?
The Borgs.
Yeah, the Borgs. Yeah, well, I was thinking.
Did you say the Philistine? Well,
Anakim.
Anakim.
They were the people of Anak.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think this has been really interesting. It's gone places I didn't necessarily expect. Went all the way around. We talked about climate change, giants, aliens. We talked about evolution. We talked about Marxism.
Barely talked about dragons. I don't know what's wrong with us.
Oh yeah, we didn't really talk about dragons. So, do you have anything on dragons?
Episode or something, right?
Just that they appear in literally every culture around the world. Talks about gigantic lizards, and what is a dinosaur other than a dragon? So while people are like, "Oh, dragons are fantasy, dinosaurs are fact," they're the same thing.
Yeah, I think even to the fact that they could have been able to spit fire, because there is some kind of still existing type of creature that can actually spit fire. So even the fire-breathing dragon is a possibility, and could be a historical creature, even into the 1100s or whatever the last. Who was it? I want to say Bellin the Dragon, but that's not it.
St. George.
King George and the Dragon.
Yeah, St. George and the Dragon.
Oh well.
I think that, but it's interesting because it goes back to that whole thing of like animals could grow larger, but I think that as we go through time, they're not able to grow as large because the basically atrophy is the way I think about it. The atmosphere is breaking down more and more as we go, and the conditions for people other than humans, which have been able to supplement through scientific advancements, other creatures' lifespans are getting shorter and shorter. And so yeah, so like that's kind of my take on that. And it's funny, you know, dragons are a lot of things that people like you said, like it's all through history they're called dragons, and then all of a sudden we stop calling them dragons, we start calling them dinosaurs. It's like, you know, oh, like, okay, these are just, you know, similar, same, you know, reptile creatures, you know, that do that. And I think it's, you know, if they were just bigger, or, you know, what makes the difference?
Narrative, as they say, right?
Yeah, hijack the narrative
because they're current in history, and you know, they were allotted a different timeline because where they were found in the so-called evolution settlement of the
sedimentary layers.
Sedimentary layers there. So
so
they got relegated to a different place.
Evolution really poisoned the dialogue and how we think about history. And I think it's putting, as we advance technologically speaking, we're getting dumber in the area of, you know, how we look at things, because we're looking at it from a lens where, like, historically, largely creation throughout history, even if it was a secular version of creation, as in, like, you know, the gods created the earth, and, you know, they whatever mythology, there was still a sort of creation. There was a flood. There was, you know, all of, like, human history all agreed until Darwin came up with this evolution, and all the smart people had just gathered, you know,
we don't even know what a woman is now.
And now, we don't know what a woman is. We're done, you know, we're
define a woman.
we need to have a, like, end of civilization conversation, how, you know, predict the end of the world, because I think that'll be a fun one, just like this one. But all right, so this has been this week's episode. It's been a lot of fun, been a little bit different, been a little bit more lighthearted. Next week we'll do a healthcare, and then, you know, we've been trying to do this education part 2, bring you the rest of that. We will do that eventually. We will get that done, but it just takes some time to coordinate everybody's schedules. So just bear with us with that. And please, if you want to listen to this on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, on any platform, you're always welcome to catch us on YouTube. That's where the channel started. There's more things on YouTube, like reactions and such, that you can tune into. And we really appreciate you. And we will see you next time.